Hi, my name is Marty Whittakin. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist, an author, and a radio host. And we've been doing this series on shopping for health, trying to sort out some of the myths from the facts about the foods and beverages that are all around us. And today we're going to talk about coffee. Who doesn't love coffee? At least the smell of it. People I know who don't like to drink it still love the smell of it. It's very distinctive, and it is the most widely used, you can call it a drug because of the caffeine, around the world. And somehow, through good marketing, we got the idea that it all comes from Colombia. Not so much. 2.5 times as much come from Vietnam. A lot more, like 6 times as much, comes from Brazil. It's actually made in 60 countries around the world. And just from an environmental standpoint, if it's shade grown, that's better. They don't clear, and it has some implications. But in general, one of the things we love about it is that it has no calories. And therefore, we would be inclined to love it only for that, but there are 1,000 substances in coffee, and we'll find out some of them are better than others, but probably a whole lot yet we just don't know about coffee. And for example, I have 2 books in my library talking about how great coffee is. I've got 2 books saying, oh my goodness, it's like the worst thing ever. And as is usually the case, the truth is somewhere in the middle, because they're only essential nutrients in very tiny traces, but there are some antioxidants called polyphenols, and for some people around the world, that may be the main source where they get these antioxidant nutrients that have health benefits. It starts out as a berry. It's not harvested like this, though. They pick it green and roast it, and usually not until after it's been exported. They export the green beans, then those are roasted, and the variety, whether it's this variety or the Robusta or the Arabica, those varieties have an influence on the flavor and the caffeine content, but so does the roasting. Probably that's the bigger factor, is how long and at what temperature it's roasted. So caffeine, the one variety, that Robusta, has almost half again as much as the Arabica, which is, and most of the containers will tell you what bean is in it. Of course, there is decaf, and it has, surprisingly, still has some. It may have as much as 20%. And it's important, if you're buying decaf, I think, to get one that is Swiss processed or water processed, because they get the caffeine out just with water and not with chemicals. Regular coffee, about 71 milligrams. However, a Starbucks Venti iced coffee, and Venti is Latin, Italian, one of those for 20, and so this one's 24 ounces. Some of that's ice, but 235 milligrams, so if caffeine bothers you, you've got kind of an idea where it comes from. But it's in a lot of things, so if you're wanting a good night's sleep and caffeine bothers you, you've got to watch out for chocolate, certainly soft drinks, and not just the dark ones. Mountain Dew has a load of caffeine in it, and even some of the medicines have caffeine. So you kind of need to look at your total load of caffeine if you're caffeine sensitive, or if, for example, you're pregnant or breastfeeding or trying to get pregnant. There's some indications that maybe you would want to cut down on the caffeine. Caffeine does some stuff we really like. It wakes us up. And in fact, a study, I kid you not, bees, honeybees, were better able to learn where their source of food was and where the hive was if they were given caffeine. How they did that, I don't know. I have visions of little tiny cups of coffee, but I'm sure that's not how they did it. But it does help us remember it wakes us up for that staff meeting, and it burns fat. Gotta love that. So also, if you think it improves your mood, you're right. It has an action similar to some of the antidepressant drugs. It's an MAO inhibitor. So that might be one thing to watch if you're on a medication like that or you're getting an interaction. A little bit of a diuretic. And sometimes I'll hear supposedly authoritative sources say, no, it's not diuretic. Just ask somebody who just had a cup of coffee and they're too far away from the next rest stop on the highway. I don't think they agree with that. Now, if you take the isolated caffeine, which is done a lot because it's put in medicine, it's put in medications like NoDoz, it's used in some sports preparations, you have to be careful when you isolate it, because a tablespoon, which would be, you'd have to drink 70 cups of coffee to get that much, but a tablespoon of caffeine by itself will kill you. So not everything is a little is good, more is better, that's for sure. If you're driving across West Texas, I think caffeine might save your life. So in that case, boy, yeah, because your biggest threat is falling asleep at the wheel. Now, let's look at what's, if you'll forgive the pun, brewing in coffee science. It's been shown, and links, none of these I would consider yet proven, but to be helpful to improvements in everything from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's. The reduction in suicide rate, that makes a lot of sense if it acts like an antidepressant. But gallstones, gum disease, a lot of these are kind of interesting. And on the subject of cancer, several that show a benefit, a couple of others that are still being questioned. It's a lot of research still going on. And when I say associated with, I want to point out that how often are fire trucks associated with fires? A lot, almost always. That doesn't mean the fire trucks caused the fire. Most likely did not. But when you get these associations, you have to have a lot of them, and then you have to have an intervention study where you change nothing else but that one thing, and then you can prove it. So we have to be a little careful, even on the negative side, when it's associated with things like maybe, and this, you can probably, some of these, measure it yourself. If you drink coffee and you feel anxious and stressed, or your blood pressure goes up, or it gives you a migraine, or you can feel your heart palpitations, those are things you can measure. But arterial stiffness, maybe not so much. Cravings, a lot of people say that the coffee keeps them from cravings. The studies show, well, maybe it causes some cravings. So here's the thing, everybody is different. Your reaction to substances and foods is unique to you. So you can do a lot of good just by keeping a little food diary and seeing what affects you and in what way. Sleep interference, well, I know people that can have a good night cup of coffee at 9 o'clock and go right to sleep. Other people, if they have it after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, can't get to sleep. It may take as much as 24 hours to clear all of the caffeine out of your system. So again, a very individual matter. It might have something to do with how effectively your liver is working, because that's where the caffeine is processed. This is something that's in coffee that's prepared, more of it in some ways and in other ways. They're called diterpenes, and they're oils. This is why there's a reputation, you may have heard, coffee increases cholesterol. Well, it's because of the diterpenes, but you can filter out most of it, and even decaf has some in there, so it depends on how you do it. Cowboy coffee, where it's just boiled, or the coffee press, those oils are still in there. It takes the paper filter to get it out, because if you use a metal filter, as you might in a percolator or in one of these drips, or even in the do-it-yourself K-cups for a Keurig, for example, if it's a metal filter, you don't take that oil out. So if you have cholesterol problems and you're looking for many different ways to lower cholesterol, it's one little thing you can do is make sure that your coffee's been filtered. Now, there's a lot of gray areas in the science. I have got studies in my file that are 30 years old saying one thing about coffee, and the most recent, if I go back to the databases and look, the most recent will say exactly the opposite. So you can't get too carried away with any particular study because the trends more and more is revealed over time, and it seems to change the outcome. But the worries are about things that are very, very delicate, like birth defects and miscarriage. A little bit of concern about osteoporosis, but again, it's not been proven. And heartburn, a lot of the conventional wisdom says, and you may hear this from your doctor, if you've got heartburn, oh, don't drink coffee. Well, it's not very acidic, and it doesn't look like in the studies that it really does stimulate stomach acid or cause any problems. Some people, it actually improves their digestion and helps with constipation. So what else is in coffee? Well, it's the most sprayed crop in the world. So I try to always get organic because it avoids those pesticides. We just don't need to add pesticides if we can avoid it. The acrylamide is when you bake bread and the crust gets real brown, that's part of that is acrylamide. And so maybe the little kids that want you to cut the crust off, who knows, maybe they were right. Roasting increases that. That's probably not a good thing. Time will tell on the studies on that. If you're using tap water that hasn't been filtered, whatever was in the tap water will be in the coffee. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff getting into the groundwater, thousands of chemicals, medications are now found in tap water. The processing at the municipal water processing, it takes out twigs, it takes out a lot of the bacterial content, and some chemicals actually put some others in, like chlorine and fluoride, but it cannot remove antibiotics and some of the other medications. So it makes sense, and you get a much better tasting cup of coffee if you filter the water first. Plasticizers interfere with hormones. So I'm not a fan of drinking through the plastic lid that comes on takeout coffee or the straws or plastic cups. A lot of times we get in trouble by what we add to the coffee. These so-called creamers, and I put that in parentheses. I don't have a problem with people putting cream in their coffee, but these creamers have trans fats and they're high in omega-6 fats. And in our video on the fats, we talk about what's wrong with those things. Sugar, that's subject for another video as well. Salt, artificial colors, flavors, and chemicals. That's not cream. Then there's the added sugars. Americans eat something on the order of 140 pounds of sugar a year. That is vastly different than our ancestors, where a little bit of sugar was a treat. Now it's just huge amounts of sugar, and we often don't know where it's coming from because it's hidden in things. So we can feel very good that we don't put sugar on our cereal and we don't add sugar to the coffee, but we might buy it already sugared. For example, this looks yummy, but that's how much sugar is in it. And in case you can't kind of figure out what 84 grams of sugar or 21 teaspoons looks like, let me show you. It's this much. That's in one drink. That is a heck of a lot. And if you do that a couple of times a day or something equivalent, you are well past what they recommend as the amount of sugar that you should have in an entire day. Something like 25 grams is way more than we need. You could have 3 Snickers, full-size bars, and not have that much sugar. So the takeaway, just some common sense and paying attention to your biochemical individuality, because you are different and you may have a fabulous response to coffee. It may bother you. There are a number of other ways that you can get the flavonoids and the polyphenols and the nutrients that are in coffee, vegetables, fruits, superfruits, and so on. A lot of the studies show the benefits actually in the caffeine. So if caffeine doesn't bother you, maybe there's not a good reason to take some of the flavor away by having decaf. It is an individual matter, and as the books and the studies show, there are pluses and minuses, and I hope you'll at least just get the best kind that you can, organic if possible, and be sure to filter it so that you get the cholesterol-raising compounds out of it, because we haven't found any reason yet that you would want to have those things. Coffee? I think I'm going to have to go get some right now. This has made me thirsty.